The doors exploded inward with a crack that shook dust from the ancient rafters. Every head in the great hall turned as one. The Alpha King froze mid-sentence, his goblet hovering at his lips. His advisors, 12 of the strongest wolves in the kingdom, rose from their seats with hands flying to weapons. The visiting chieftains from the northern pack stopped their laughter. Even the servants pressed against the stone walls went absolutely still. She stood in the doorway like a storm-given flesh. Her cloak was torn, hanging in shreds that revealed arms marked with fresh claw wounds still weeping blood. Her hair, dark as midnight water, was matted with dirt and something darker. Mud caked her boots and splattered up her legs. But it was what she carried that made grown warriors take a step back. The head was massive, larger than any wolf's had a right to be. Its fur was the color of shadows at dusk, and even in death, its fangs gleamed white and terrible. The eyes, milky now but still somehow aware, seemed to stare at every person in that hall. She held it by one of its great ears, her small hand barely spanning half the width. The neck had been severed clean, and dark blood dripped steadily onto the polished floor stones, each drop echoing in the silence like a drum. She was Omega. Everyone could smell it on her, that particular scent that marked her as the lowest, the weakest, the one who should be serving food and mending clothes and keeping her eyes down. Omegas did not hunt. Omegas did not kill. Omegas certainly did not walk into the Alpha King's hall dripping with gore and carrying trophies. Yet here she was. Thessa? The Alpha King finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. King Hadric was a man who had led armies, who had crushed rebellions, whose very name made enemies flee. But now he looked at this slip of a girl and something flickered in his amber eyes. Fear, perhaps. Or recognition. She took 3 steps forward. The head swung slightly with each movement, and those dead eyes seemed to follow the king. More blood spattered on the floor. Somewhere, a servant whimpered. "I found him," Thessa said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like wind through a canyon. The Shadow Wolf. The one who has been taking our people for 3 seasons. The one your hunters could not track. The one your warriors could not kill. She lifted the head higher, and in the firelight from the great hearth, they could all see the sheer size of the thing. This was no ordinary wolf, no normal creature of the forests. This was something older, something from the time before times, when wolves were gods and the moon spoke in voices men could understand. He begged, at the end, Thessa continued, and now she was walking forward, toward the raised platform where the king sat in his carved throne of blackwood and bone. The advisors moved to block her, but Hadric raised one hand, stopping them. His eyes never left the Omega girl. He told me things. About the darkness coming from the eastern mountains. About the packs that gather there, packs we have never seen, with eyes like coals and hunger that cannot be satisfied. She reached the base of the platform. 3 stone steps separated her from the king. She climbed the first one, and every guard in the room tensed. She climbed the second, and hands went to sword hilts. She climbed the third, and now she stood level with King Hadric himself, close enough that he could smell the blood on her, the forest in her hair, the death that clung to her torn clothes. Thessa held out the head, offering it like a servant might offer wine. The king did not take it. Could not, perhaps. His hands remained frozen on the arms of his throne, knuckles white with pressure. "There is something you should know," Thessa said, and she smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had looked into the dark and found something looking back. "Before I took his head, the Shadow Wolf told me a secret. He was not the one we should fear. He was merely the messenger. she dropped the head. It hit the stone at the king's feet with a wet, heavy thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. The jaw fell open, revealing those terrible fangs, rows of them, more than any wolf should have. He said the pale ones are coming, Thessa whispered, but every soul in that vast room heard her. He said they have been sleeping in the eastern peaks for 1,000 years, and now they wake. He said they sent him to taste our blood, to see if we were still strong, still worthy of the old ways. King Hadric's face had gone the color of ash. Around the hall, the older wolves, those who remembered the ancient stories their grandmothers told, began to murmur. The pale ones. The first pack. The ones who had ruled before humans learned to make fire, before the moon had a name. He said they found us wanting, Thessa continued. He said we have grown soft in our stone halls, weak with our farms and our laws and our careful little lives. He said they are coming to remind us what it means to be a wolf. She turned then, slowly, looking at each face in the hall. Warriors who had fought in a dozen campaigns found themselves unable to meet her gaze. Advisors who counseled kings studied their shoes. Only the king continued to stare at her, and in his eyes was the look of a man watching his kingdom crumble before it had even been attacked. And then he said one more thing, Thessa said, turning back to face Hadric directly. She leaned forward, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough that he could count the scratches on her face. He said to give you a message. From them. From the pale ones. What message? The king's voice was barely a whisper. Thessa's smile widened, and there was something wild in it, something that had not been there before she went into the forest. Something she had perhaps found in the shadow wolf's dying eyes. They said to tell you that you are next. The hall erupted. The advisors shouted. Warriors drew weapons. Chieftains leaped to their feet, demanding answers, demanding action, demanding anything but the terrible truth that had just walked through their doors covered in blood and legend. But Thessa did not move. She stood there on the platform, next to the king's throne, looking down at them all. An Omega girl who should have been invisible, who should have been nothing, who now commanded the attention of every powerful wolf in the kingdom. And King Hadric sat very, very still, staring at the severed head at his feet, at the Omega who had brought it, and at the future that suddenly looked a great deal darker than it had when the sun rose that morning. How, he finally asked, when the shouting had died down to mutters, when his guards had managed to restore some semblance of order. How did you kill it? You are Omega. You have no training, no strength, no wolf strong enough to. I did not use strength, Thessa interrupted, and interrupting a king was perhaps the second most shocking thing she had done that day. The shadow wolf expected strength. He expected warriors with silver claws and battle fury. He expected everything you sent against him for 3 seasons, everything that failed. She knelt then, there on the platform, and pulled a small knife from her boot. It was nothing special, just a common blade that any peasant might carry for cutting rope or skinning rabbits. The king stared at it, confused. I tracked him to his den in the Whispering Gorge, Thessa said. I did not announce myself. I did not challenge him to honorable combat. I waited until he slept, and then I climbed down from the rocks above, and I cut his throat. The hall went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of shock, of disgust, of 100 wolves realizing that one of their own had won without honor, without following any of the old codes. You murdered him, one of the advisors spat. His name was Garen, and he was old, his muzzle gray with age. In his sleep. Like a coward. Like an assassin. This is not the wolf way. No, Thessa agreed, standing again. It is not. But he is dead, and I am alive, and the people he would have taken next will see another dawn. The wolf way has killed 30 of our best warriors in 3 seasons. My way killed him in 1 night. You have dishonored yourself, Garen continued. You have dishonored all of us. When the other packs hear of this, the other packs will hear that the shadow wolf is dead. Thessa cut him off. They will hear that the raids have stopped. They will hear that the crying in the night is finished. They will not care how it was done. King Hadric held up his hand, stopping Garen from responding. The old advisor sat back down, but his face was twisted with anger and something else. Shame, perhaps, that an Omega had succeeded where his warriors had failed. You took a great risk, the king said to Thessa. What if you had failed? What if he had woken? Then I would be dead, Thessa said simply. But I did not fail. And now you know what is coming. Now you have time to prepare. Time, Hadric repeated, looking down at the severed head. One of its eyes had rolled back in its skull, giving it an even more unsettling appearance. How much time? He said the first snows. When the eastern passes become thick with ice, that is when they will come down. They prefer the cold, he said. It makes them strong and us weak. The first snows were 6 weeks away, perhaps 8 if the weather held. It was not enough time. Not nearly enough. Why did you not come to me when you first thought to hunt him? Hadric asked. Why did you go alone? For the first time since entering the hall, Thessa looked uncomfortable. She glanced away, toward the high windows where the last light of day was fading into purple dusk. Would you have let me? She asked quietly. An Omega girl who barely reaches most men's shoulders? Would you have listened, or would you have sent me back to the kitchens? The king had no answer for that, because they both knew the truth. He would have dismissed her. They all would have. Omegas did not hunt the shadow wolf. Omegas did not save kingdoms. Except this one had. What is your family name? Hadric asked. I have none, my lord. My parents died when I was young. I have lived in the servants' quarters of the southern barracks since I was 7 summers old. You have a name now, the king said, and his voice carried through the hall with the weight of command. From this day forward, you are Thessa Shadowbane. You will be given quarters in the main keep. You will be given arms and armor if you wish them. And you will counsel me on what we face, because you are the only one who has spoken with the enemy and lived. The hall erupted again, but this time with protests. An Omega, given a family name by the king himself? Given quarters in the main keep, where only high-ranking wolves and nobles dwelled? It was unthinkable. It was against every tradition. But Hadric silenced them with a look. She killed what we could not, he said. She brought me the truth when everyone else brought me only corpses and excuses. If the Pale Ones are truly coming, if the old darkness wakes, then we need wolves who can do what must be done, not what is honorable. We need survivors. He stood from his throne, a towering figure even among wolves, and looked down at Thessa. She met his gaze without flinching, this small Omega girl who had somehow brought a kingdom to its knees with a single act of violence. Tell me everything, he said, Hadric commanded. Every word, every detail. Leave nothing out. And so Thessa began to speak, there in the great hall, with the shadow wolf's head staring sightlessly at them all and the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky outside. She told them about the Pale Ones, who were said to be twice the size of normal wolves, with fur as white as bone and eyes that glowed red in darkness. She told them about the prophecy the shadow wolf had whispered with his dying breath, about the moon turning black and the rivers running red. She told them about the army that gathered in the eastern peaks, thousands strong, made up of creatures that had not walked the earth since the age of legends. And as she spoke, every wolf in that hall understood that the world they knew was ending. The age of stone walls and safe kingdoms was over. The old darkness was returning, and nothing would ever be the same. But they also understood something else. They had found their warning. They had found their prophet. She was Omega. She was small. She was nothing. And yet, standing there covered in blood and speaking of doom, Thessa Shadowbane looked very much like something. Perhaps even like hope. 3 days after Thessa walked into the great hall with her grim trophy, King Hadric called a war council. Not just his usual advisors, but representatives from every major pack in the kingdom. They came from the mountains in the north, from the river valleys in the south, from the dense forests of the west. They came reluctantly, many of them, not believing the stories that had spread like wildfire through the realm. The Shadow Wolf is dead. Killed by an Omega. The Pale One's returning. It sounded like madness. The council met in the king's strategy room, a circular chamber at the top of the northern tower where maps covered every wall and the great table in the center bore carved representations of every territory in the known world. 50 wolves crowded into a space meant for 20, and the air grew thick with competing scents and barely contained aggression. Thessa stood in the corner, uncomfortable in the new clothes she had been given. They were fine clothes, better than anything she had worn in her life, but they felt wrong on her skin. She was used to rough servant's garb, used to being invisible. Now every eye in the room found her eventually, studying her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Hadric entered last, as was his right, and the room fell silent. He took his place at the head of the table, and his presence alone seemed to fill the chamber. The king was not the largest wolf there, not the scariest or the most decorated with battle honors, but he carried authority like some men carried swords. "You know why I have called you here," he began without preamble. 3 nights ago, the shadow wolf that has plagued us for 3 seasons was killed. His head sits now in my trophy room, and I have seen it with my own eyes. The threat has ended. Some of the gathered wolves relaxed slightly at this news. The shadow wolf's raids had affected everyone, though some territories more than others. Children taken from their beds. Hunters vanishing in the night. Livestock slaughtered in numbers that suggested madness rather than hunger. However, Hadric continued, and his tone made them tense again. The shadow wolf was merely the beginning. Before he died, he delivered a message. The Pale Ones are returning. The room erupted into shouting. Half the wolves present laughed, dismissing it as legend and superstition. The other half looked worried, old enough to remember the stories, to feel the weight of ancient fear in their bones. The Pale Ones are children's tales, said Dravan, alpha of the northern mountain packs. He was huge, even for a wolf, with scars crisscrossing his face and arms. Stories to frighten pups into obedience. They are not real. Are they not? Hadric gestured to Thessa. The one who killed the shadow wolf spoke with him in his final moments. She will tell you what he said. All eyes turned to Thessa, and she felt her throat go dry. She had spoken to a dying monster in a cave. She had not prepared to speak to 50 alpha wolves in a war council. But the king was looking at her expectantly, and there was no escape. She stepped forward, moving to the table's edge where she could see them all and they could see her. So many faces, so much power concentrated in one room. She was Omega, and Omega did not speak at councils. Omega served and bowed and disappeared. But she had been given a name. Shadowbane. Perhaps it was time to live up to it. The shadow wolf was old, she began, and her voice was steady despite her nerves. Older than any wolf I have ever seen. His teeth were worn from years of use, his claws cracked with age. He told me he had lived for 500 winters in the deep places beneath the eastern mountains. Impossible, Dervan scoffed. No wolf lives that long. No normal wolf, Thessa agreed. But he was not normal. He was sent. The Pale Ones woke him from some kind of sleep, from some preserved state I do not understand. They sent him to test us, to see if we were still strong, still worthy of the old ways. She pulled out a piece of parchment from her pocket, something she had written the night before, trying to remember every detail of that conversation in the cave. Her hand shook slightly as she unfolded it. He said the Pale Ones are the first pack, the ones who walked when the world was young and the moon was new. He said they ruled for 10,000 years before they chose to sleep, to wait for a time when the earth would need them again. He said that time is now. And why would they wake now? Asked Fenra, Alpha of the Western Forests. She was younger than Dervan, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. What has changed? Thessa looked at the map carved into the great table, at the territories marked out in different woods and stones. He said we have forgotten. Forgotten what it means to be a wolf. We build walls and write laws and sit in councils talking instead of hunting. We have become soft, predictable, weak. The Pale Ones despise weakness. We are not weak, Dervan snarled, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to make the carved wooden rivers tremble. I have led my pack through 20 winters. We have defended our territory from raiders and beasts and hostile packs. We are strong. Are you? Thessa met his eyes, and she saw him flinch slightly at her directness. Omega did not meet Alpha's eyes. It was one of the oldest rules. When was the last time you hunted your own food? When was the last time you slept under open stars without guards posted? When was the last time you relied on your teeth and claws instead of steel and silver? The room had gone very quiet. She was treading dangerous ground, challenging alphas in their own territory. But she had gone too far to stop now. The shadow wolf did not fear your warriors, she continued. He told me he had killed dozens of them, and each one died the same way. Expecting honor, expecting rules, expecting him to fight fairly. He said the Pale Ones will not fight fairly. They will use every advantage, every weakness, every soft spot they can find. And we have many soft spots now. So what would you have us do? Fenra asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice rather than mockery. Abandon our homes? Forsake civilization? Live like savages in the wilderness? No, Thessa said. But perhaps remember that civilization is not the same as survival. Perhaps remember that we are wolves first, and builders second. King Hadric nodded slowly. She speaks wisdom. The shadow wolf adapted to hunt us in ways we did not expect. If the Pale Ones are truly coming, they will be even more dangerous, even less bound by our ideas of honor and combat. You believe her? Dervan looked at the king with something like betrayal in his eyes. You believe this Omega who killed our enemy through treachery and cowardice? I believe the shadow wolf is dead, Hadric said calmly. I believe his head sits in my trophy room with its throat cut. I believe that no warrior we sent against him managed what this Omega girl did alone. So yes, I am inclined to believe her. This is madness, another alpha muttered, an older wolf named Cassin who led one of the southern river packs. We are discussing fairy tales and nightmares. Even if the Pale Ones exist, even if they are waking, what can we possibly do? If they are as powerful as the legends say, then we will need to be smarter, Thessa interrupted, and immediately regretted it when every eye turned to glare at her. Omega did not interrupt Alphas. Omega certainly did not interrupt in war councils. But she had started, so she finished. The Shadow Wolf was powerful too. But he had weaknesses. He slept deeply, trusting in his remote location. He hunted alone, believing himself invincible. He underestimated an Omega because she did not fit his understanding of threats. She moved to the map table, tracing her fingers along the carved eastern mountains. The Pale Ones will have weaknesses too. They have been asleep for 1,000 years. The world has changed. We know these lands, these forests, these valleys. They will be returning to a home they no longer recognize. Assuming they return at all, Dervan said. Assuming this is not all simply the delusions of a dying monster and the overactive imagination of a servant girl. Then prove me wrong, Thessa challenged him, and this time she did not look away when he met her stare. Send scouts to the eastern peaks. Search for signs of the Pale Ones. If I am lying, if this is all imagination, then you will find nothing and can return to your territories in peace. But if I am right... She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Everyone in that room understood what hung in the balance. Hadric stood, drawing all attention back to himself. We will send scouts. 3 groups, from different directions, approach the eastern peaks and observe. They will report back within 2 weeks. In the meantime, we prepare. Every pack will inventory their weapons, their food stores, their fighting wolves. We will assume the threat is real until proven otherwise. And if the scouts find nothing? Cassan asked. If this proves to be a waste of time and resources? Then we will have lost 2 weeks of preparation time for a threat that did not exist, Hadric said. But if we do nothing and the threat is real, we will lose everything. I know which risk I prefer to take. The council continued for hours after that, dissolving into arguments about logistics and strategy, about which packs would contribute what resources, about ancient defensive treaties and newer territorial disputes. Thessa retreated back to her corner, overwhelmed by the politics and posturing. This was not her world. She was a hunter, not a diplomat. But as the Alphas argued and postured, she noticed one wolf watching her. His name was Corvin, and he led one of the eastern packs, those who lived closest to the mountains where the Pale Ones supposedly slept. He was younger than most of the other Alphas, perhaps only a handful of years older than Thessa herself, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When the council finally ended and the wolves began to disperse, Corvin approached her. You tracked the Shadow Wolf to the Whispering Gorge, he said without introduction. That is 3 days' hard travel from the nearest settlement. How did you find him? Thessa considered not answering. She had revealed much already, perhaps too much. But Corvin did not speak with the mockery or hostility of the other Alphas. He seemed genuinely curious. I followed the patterns, she said finally. The raids happened in a specific sequence, hitting different villages on different nights but always moving in a circle. I mapped them all, and the center of the circle was the Whispering Gorge. It seemed like a good place to start looking. You did what our best trackers could not, Corvin said. They followed scent trails and tracks, always one step behind. You followed logic and patience. Is there a question in that observation? Corvin smiled slightly. My territory borders the eastern peaks. If the Pale Ones are truly there, my pack will be the first to face them. I would like someone with me who thinks differently than the traditional hunters. Thessa stared at him. You are asking me to join your scouting party? I am asking you to help me find the truth. The king will send scouts, yes, but they will be warriors, trained to fight and intimidate. They will search as warriors search. But if the pale ones are as cunning as the shadow wolf, they will hide from warriors. And you think they will not hide from me? I think they will hide differently. And I think you will notice what warriors would miss. Corvin glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. I also think that if you are right, if they are truly coming, then I would rather have you on my side than wondering what might have been. It was manipulation, Thessa realized. Flattery mixed with truth, designed to get her to agree. But it was also sensible. She had started this when she walked into the great hall with the shadow wolf's head. She could not stop now just because it became difficult or dangerous. When do we leave? She asked. 2 days. We will travel light and fast. No more than 5 wolves. I will be ready. Corvin nodded and turned to leave, then paused. The other alphas do not like you. They see you as a threat to the natural order. An Omega who does not know her place. I know my place, Thessa said quietly. It is just different than they think it should be. Good. Corvin's smile widened. Because if we find what I think we will find in those mountains, the natural order is going to change whether they like it or not. He left then, leaving Thessa alone in the emptying council chamber. She looked at the great map table, at the carved eastern mountains, and wondered what waited for them there. The shadow wolf had been terrifying enough, and he had been only a messenger. What would the message senders be like? She touched the knife at her belt, the simple blade that had ended a legend. It seemed very small suddenly, very inadequate for what might be coming. But it had worked before. Perhaps it would work again. Or perhaps this time, when she faced the darkness would be ready for her. Either way, she would know soon enough. The journey to the eastern mountains took 4 days of hard travel through terrain that grew increasingly hostile with each mile. Corvin had kept his word about traveling light, only 5 wolves made the trek. Besides Thessa and Corvin, there was JL, a tracker whose nose could follow scents through water and across stone, Bryn, a warrior who had fought in the northern campaigns and survived injuries that should have killed him, and Amara, a healer who could identify plants and poisons with a single glance. They spoke little as they traveled, conserving energy for the climb ahead. The eastern peaks were not the highest mountains in the kingdom, but they were the oldest, formed in the earth's youth and worn by countless ages of wind and weather. The approach was treacherous, with loose scree that could send an unwary traveler tumbling hundreds of feet down sheer cliff faces. On the 3rd night, they made camp in a shallow cave that offered some protection from the wind. The temperature had dropped steadily as they climbed, and now their breath fogged in the air despite it being late summer in the lowlands. JL built a small fire using dry wood he had carried specifically for this purpose, wood that would produce minimal smoke. They could not afford to be seen, not if they were walking into the territory of something as dangerous as the legends suggested. Tell me about the Whispering Gorge, Bryn said to Thessa as they ate their meager dinner of dried meat and hard bread. What was it like, facing the shadow wolf? Thessa had been asked this question a dozen times since returning from her hunt, and each time she struggled to find the words. How did you describe the moment when you realized you might die? When you saw something so far beyond normal experience that your mind struggled to accept it as real? It was dark, she said finally. The gorge is narrow, and the walls are high enough that sunlight only reaches the bottom for a few hours each day. His den was in a crack in the rock face, hidden behind a waterfall. I would have missed it entirely except I saw bones, animal bones, but also human bones? Amara asked softly. Thessa nodded. Small ones. Children's bones. He preferred young prey, he told me later. Easier to carry. Sweeter meat. The group fell silent, each of them imagining what that meant, what families had suffered because their best warriors had been unable to stop one creature. How did you get close enough to kill him? Corvin asked. He had been mostly quiet during the journey, focused on navigation and keeping them on the least visible paths. But now he watched Thessa with that same sharp intelligence she had noticed in the council chamber. I waited, Thessa said. I climbed to a ledge above his den and waited for 3 days without moving. Barely eating. Not sleeping. Just watching. I learned his patterns, his routines. He hunted at night, returned at dawn, and slept during the day. On the 3rd day, when I was certain he was in deep sleep, I climbed down. The waterfall covered any sound I might have made. And then you just cut his throat? Bryn sounded skeptical. A creature that size, that powerful, and he did not wake? He woke, Thessa said quietly, remembering those final moments with perfect clarity. I cut his throat, yes, but not deeply enough. He woke in pain and rage. He tried to kill me even as he was dying. That is when he spoke, when he told me about the pale ones. He wanted me to know what was coming. He wanted me to be afraid. Were you? JL asked. Afraid? I am always afraid, Thessa admitted. But fear has never stopped me from doing what needs to be done. Corvin nodded as if she had confirmed something he suspected. That is why you will survive what is coming. The ones who are never afraid are the ones who make fatal mistakes. They slept in shifts that night, with one person always keeping watch. Thessa took the final shift, from deep night until dawn, and she spent the hours staring out at the eastern peaks that rose like teeth against the stars. Somewhere up there, according to the shadow wolf, something ancient was waking. She found herself hoping he had been lying, that this was all some elaborate deception. But she did not believe in false hope. Better to expect the worst and be pleasantly surprised than to expect safety and be caught unprepared. Dawn came cold and gray, with thick clouds rolling in from the north. They ate quickly and continued climbing. The path, if it could be called that, grew steeper and more treacherous. Several times they had to rope together and move carefully across sections where a single misstep would mean death. By midday they had reached a plateau where the mountains opened into a wide valley. And there, in the center of the valley, they found the first sign that Thessa's warnings had been true. The corpse lay in a clearing, and at first glance it looked like it might have been there for years. But as they approached, Thessa realized it was relatively fresh, perhaps only a few weeks old. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf she had ever seen. It was enormous, easily twice the size of the largest alpha. But more disturbing was its color. The fur had been pure white, though now it was stained with the brown of dried blood and the gray of decomposition. Even in death, even rotting, it was beautiful in a terrible way. Pale ones, Amara whispered, and her voice shook slightly. They are real. JL circled the corpse, studying it from different angles. This one was injured. See the wounds along its flanks? Something fought it, something powerful enough to cause serious damage. But what could fight something like this? Bryn knelt beside the body, his warrior's eye cataloging the injuries. These wounds are deep, made by claws or teeth of significant size. It would take. Another pale one, Corvin finished. They fought among themselves. Thessa moved closer, forcing herself to examine the creature despite her instinct to flee. The shadow wolf had been terrible, but this was something else entirely. Even dead, even decomposing, it radiated power. She could see how muscles layered beneath the skin, how the bone structure was designed for both speed and crushing strength. The teeth, visible where the lips had pulled back, were like ivory daggers. "Look at this," Amara said, pointing to something on the wolf's neck. There was a mark there, partially hidden by matted fur, a symbol burned or carved into the flesh. It looked like 3 circles interlocked with a line running through all of them. "What does it mean?" Bryn asked. "I do not know," Corvin admitted. "But it was made deliberately. Some kind of marking or designation." They continued into the valley, moving cautiously now, every sense alert for danger. The evidence of the Pale Ones was everywhere once they knew what to look for. Massive paw prints and patches of remaining snow, far larger than any normal wolf's. Trees with claw marks higher than any wolf should be able to reach. And bones, so many bones, scattered across the valley floor like seeds planted by death itself. "They have been hunting," JL said, crouching beside a pile of remains. "Deer, mountain goats, bears. Even other wolves. Everything that moves in these mountains has become their prey. How many do you think there are?" Bryn's hand rested on his sword hilt, though they all knew any weapon would be inadequate against creatures of this size. "Dozens, at least," Corvin said grimly. "Maybe hundreds. This entire valley is a hunting ground." They found the entrance to the den just before nightfall. It was a massive cave opening in the side of the mountain, tall enough that 3 men could have walked side by side without ducking. The stone around the entrance was worn smooth, as if countless bodies had rubbed against it over thousands of years. "We should not go in," Amara said, and no one disagreed with her. But they did not need to go in. They could hear sounds coming from deep within the mountain, breathing, movement, the scrape of claws on stone. And beneath it all, a sound that made Thessa's blood run cold. It was almost like singing, but not quite. A rhythmic rising and falling of voices or howls or something in between, speaking in a language no living wolf had heard in 1,000 years. "They are waking," Thessa whispered. Just like the shadow wolf said. "They are waking, and there are many, and they are preparing." Corvin grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the cave entrance. "We have seen enough. We need to return to the king immediately." But as they turned to leave the valley, JL suddenly froze. His nose lifted to the wind, and his eyes went wide. "We are not alone," he breathed. They saw it then, standing on a ridge above them. Another pale one, very much alive. It was even larger than the corpse they had found, its white fur pristine and glowing in the fading light. Its eyes were not red as the stories claimed, but a pale blue so light they looked almost white. And it was staring directly at them. No one moved. No one breathed. The pale one tilted its massive head, studying them with an intelligence that was worse than simple hunger. It knew what they were. It understood why they were here. For a long moment, wolves and wolves stared at each other across the valley. Then, slowly, deliberately, the pale one opened its mouth and howled. The sound shook the very stones beneath their feet, echoing through the mountains like a declaration of war. And from within the cave, dozens of voices answered. "Run," Corvin commanded, and they ran. They made it back to the capital in 3 days instead of 4, pushing themselves to exhaustion and beyond. Twice they heard howls behind them in the mountains, distant but growing closer. The pale ones were following, tracking them back to their home, learning the way. Thessa's legs burned with every step, her lungs aching in the cold air. But she did not slow down. None of them did. They had seen what was coming, and they understood now that the Shadow Wolf's warning had not been exaggeration or madness. If anything, he had understated the threat. They arrived at the capital at dawn on the fourth day, their clothes torn, their faces hollow with exhaustion. The guards at the gate nearly did not recognize them until Corvin called out his name. Then they were rushed through, given fresh water and told that the king would see them immediately. Hadric was in the great hall again, this time meeting with his closest advisors about grain stores and winter preparations. He looked up when Corvin's group entered, and whatever he saw in their faces made him dismiss everyone else immediately. "Tell me," he said when the hall was empty except for the 5 travelers and himself. Corvin did most of the talking, describing the valley, the corpse, the cave, the howling. But it was Thessa who stepped forward when he finished, holding something she had not shown the others. "I took this from the valley while we were running," she said, placing a tuft of white fur on the table before the king. "From the corpse we found. I thought you might want proof." Hadric picked up the fur carefully, as if it might bite him. Even detached from its owner, even just a small sample, it seemed to hold power. The strands were thick and coarse, designed for bitter cold. This was not a creature that would struggle with winter in the lowlands. Winter would make it stronger. "How long do we have?" the king asked. "The first snows come in 6 weeks, Corvin said. "But I do not think we have that long. They followed us. They know where we came from now. And they were preparing, organizing. We heard them in the cave, it sounded almost like planning, like communication. They are not simple beasts, your majesty. They think. They strategize." Hadric closed his hand around the white fur, his expression grim. "Then we have failed before we began. Even if I called every pack in the kingdom to defend the capital, even if we had 10,000 warriors, we could not stand against what you describe. They are too large, too strong, too many." "There might be a way," Thessa said quietly, and all eyes turned to her. "Speak," Hadric commanded. "The shadow wolf came down from those mountains," Thessa said. "He hunted in our territories for 3 seasons. He killed our people, took our children, and spread terror throughout the kingdom. But he did not attack the capital directly. He did not attack your armies head-on." "Why?" The king frowned, considering. "We assumed he was cautious. Testing our defenses. Or he was following orders," Thessa countered. "The Pale Ones sent him. They told him to test us, to see if we were worthy." "But worthy of what?" "Not worthy of defeating them. They believe they cannot be defeated. So what were we being tested for?" "I do not follow," Corvin said, though his eyes were thoughtful. "The Pale Ones are the first pack," Thessa explained. "According to legend, they ruled for 10,000 years. They did not destroy the wolves who came after them. They went to sleep, waiting. For what? For wolves who could challenge them," Amara breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Not wolves they could destroy, but wolves who could prove themselves worthy of something." "Of what?" Bryn demanded. "Of being eaten? Of being conquered? Of being taught," Thessa said. "Or of being accepted." The shadow wolf said we had grown soft, that we had forgotten what it means to be a wolf. But what if the Pale Ones do not simply want to destroy us? What if they want to make us strong again? To remind us? Hadric leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. "You think we can negotiate with them?" "I think we might be able to," Thessa said carefully. "If we approach them correctly. If we show them we have not forgotten everything. That some of us still remember what it means to hunt, to survive, to be worthy." "This is insanity," Bryn said flatly. "You saw those creatures. You heard them. They are monsters, not philosophers. They will tear us apart. They will tear us apart if we simply try to fight them, Thessa agreed. But what if we do not fight? What if we send someone to speak with them? To prove that we understand their purpose? Who would go on such a mission? Corvin asked, though from his tone, Thessa suspected he already knew the answer. Who would volunteer to walk into a den of ancient predators and try to have a conversation? Thessa met the king's eyes. I would. The hall erupted into argument, but Hadric raised his hand for silence. He studied Thessa for a long moment, this Omega who had killed a legend, who had spoken truth when others offered only comfort, who now proposed something that seemed impossible. Why you? He asked simply. Because I have already walked into a predator's den and survived, Thessa said. Because I am Omega, and they will not see me as a threat the way they would see an alpha or a warrior. Because I am the one who killed the shadow wolf, and they might respect that. And because if I am wrong, if they simply tear me apart, the kingdom loses one Omega girl instead of its king or its best warriors. No, Corvin said sharply. You are not expendable, Thessa. Not anymore. Everyone is expendable when the alternative is the extinction of our people, Thessa replied. The argument continued for hours, with different advisors being called in to give their opinions. Some thought Thessa's plan was the ravings of a desperate mind. Others saw a slim chance at survival where otherwise there was none. In the end, it was Hadric who decided, as it always was. You will go, he said to Thessa. But not alone. Corvin will accompany you, along with 2 others of your choosing. You will bring gifts, our finest furs, our best weapons, whatever might appeal to ancient predators. And you will bring this. He reached into his robe and pulled out a pendant on a silver chain. It was old, older perhaps than the kingdom itself, depicting a wolf's head carved from pale stone. This belonged to the first king of our people, before we built cities, before we wrote laws. It is said he took it from a pale one he defeated in single combat, though I always thought that was merely legend. He placed it in Thessa's palm, and she felt the weight of history in it, generations of wolves who had worn this symbol and believed in its power. Wear this when you approach them, Hadric continued. If there is any truth to the old stories, they will recognize it. It might buy you a few moments to speak before they attack. And if it does not? Then you die knowing you tried to save your people, the king said simply. There is honor in that, at least. Thessa closed her hand around the pendant, feeling the worn stone against her skin. This was madness, absolute madness. Walking back into those mountains, into that valley, to face creatures that could snap her in half without effort. But what choice did they have? Fight and die, or try to understand and maybe, possibly, survive. I will need supplies, she said. Food, furs, the finest weapons as you said. And I will take Corvin, Imara, and Jael with me. Not Bryn? The king asked. Bryn is a warrior. The pale ones will see him as a threat. Imara is a healer, Jael a tracker. They represent skills the pale ones might respect, the ability to preserve life and to find prey. And Corvin. She glanced at the alpha who had believed her from the beginning. Corvin thinks differently than other alphas. If there is a way to communicate with these creatures, he will find it. Very well, Hadric said. You leave at first light tomorrow. Every day we delay is a day the pale ones come closer to our borders. That evening, Thessa stood on the battlements of the capital, looking east toward the mountains she would return to tomorrow. Somewhere beyond those peaks, creatures out of legend were preparing for war. And she was going to walk up to them and try to have a conversation. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead, she found herself thinking about the shadow wolf, about his final words. He had been afraid of the Pale Ones, this ancient creature who feared nothing else in the world. What did that say about what waited for her in those mountains? You do not have to do this. She turned to find Corvin standing behind her. He moved quietly for such a large man, a hunter's grace despite his rank. Yes, I do, she said simply. Why? He came to stand beside her at the wall. You could refuse. No one would blame you. You have already done more than any Omega should have to do. That is exactly why I have to do this, Thessa said. Because I am Omega. Because I am supposed to be invisible, powerless, insignificant. But I killed the shadow wolf, and now I have a name, and the king listens to me. If I stop now, if I refuse this mission, I prove that Omegas truly are weak. That we cannot be trusted with important tasks. But if I succeed... If you succeed, you change everything, Corvin finished. Not just for yourself, but for every Omega in every pack throughout the kingdom. Maybe, Thessa allowed. Or maybe I just die in the mountains and no one remembers me except as a cautionary tale. I would remember you, Corvin said quietly. There was something in his voice that made Thessa look at him more carefully. In the moonlight, his face was thoughtful, sincere. This was not flattery or manipulation. This was something else. Why did you believe me? She asked. In the council chamber, when all the other alphas laughed or dismissed my warnings, you believed me. Why? Corvin was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkened mountains. Because I have spent my life learning to recognize the truth, he finally said. As an alpha, everyone tells you what they think you want to hear. They flatter and deceive and present themselves as stronger or more loyal than they are. But you walked into that hall covered in blood and spoke only the truth. You did not care what the king thought, did not care what the alphas would say. You cared only that we understood what was coming. That kind of honesty is rare. Or it was just the shock of the moment, Thessa suggested. Fear can make anyone speak honestly. Perhaps, Corvin allowed. But I do not think so. I think you are someone who always speaks the truth, whether it is convenient or not. That is worth believing in. They stood in silence for a while, two wolves who had nothing in common except a shared understanding that the world was about to change in ways neither of them could fully predict. Then Corvin spoke again. If we do not survive this mission, I want you to know something. Do not, Thessa said quickly. Do not say goodbye. We will survive. We must. We must, Corvin agreed. But if we do not, I want you to know that it was an honor to fight beside you. Omega or Alpha, names do not matter. You are the strongest wolf I have ever met. Before Thessa could respond, he turned and left, leaving her alone with the stars and the mountains and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on her shoulders. She touched the pendant at her throat, the ancient stone that had supposedly belonged to a Pale One once. If the old stories were true, her ancestors had fought these creatures and survived. Perhaps she could as well. Or perhaps the stories were just stories, and tomorrow she would discover that some legends should remain undisturbed. Either way, she would know soon enough. The journey back to the eastern mountains was different this time. They carried packs laden with gifts, furs from the northern territories, weapons forged from the finest silver, dried meats preserved with rare herbs. But more than that, they carried the weight of their entire kingdom's hopes. Thessa felt it with every step. This was no longer just about proving herself or finding the truth. This was about survival. If she failed, if the Pale Ones rejected her attempt at negotiation, there would be war. And it would be a war that wolves could not win. They reached the valley on the evening of the third day. The sun was setting, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of red and gold that looked almost like blood and fire. Thessa took that as an omen, though whether good or bad she could not say. "We should make camp here," Jael suggested, indicating a cluster of rocks that would provide some shelter. "Approach in the morning when we are fresh." But Thessa shook her head. "No. We go now. The Pale Ones hunt at night, the Shadow Wolf told me this. If we want to meet them on their terms, we must go when they are strongest, not when we feel safe." Corvin nodded slowly. "She is right. We are here to show respect, not to set the terms of engagement." So they continued into the valley as darkness fell. The temperature dropped rapidly without the sun, and soon their breath fogged in thick clouds. Thessa's hands were numb despite her gloves, but she did not slow her pace. The cave entrance loomed before them, that massive opening in the mountainside that led to depths unknown. From within came sounds, movement, breathing, the scrape of claws on stone. And that strange singing or howling that was not quite either, the ancient language of the first pack. Thessa stopped at the entrance, her companions ranged behind her. She reached up and touched the pendant at her throat, feeling its weight and history. Then she took a deep breath and called out. "Ancient Ones. First Pack. Pale Ones of the Eastern Mountains. I am Thessa Shadowbane, killer of the Shadow Wolf, and I come to speak with you." Her voice echoed into the cave, swallowed by darkness. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the singing stopped. Everything stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Movement in the darkness. The scrape of claws on stone, getting closer. And then they emerged. 3 of them came to the entrance, and even though Thessa had seen one before, even though she thought she was prepared, the sight of them made her legs want to run. They were enormous, twice the size of the corpse they had found, their white fur pristine and glowing faintly in the starlight. Their eyes were pale blue, intelligent, ancient beyond measure. The center one, the largest, stepped forward. When it opened its mouth, Thessa expected a roar or a snarl. Instead, it spoke. The words were twisted, strained through a throat not quite made for human speech, but they were words nonetheless. "You killed more than," it said, and its voice sounded like grinding stone. "The Shadow Wolf. Our scout. Our messenger." "I did," Thessa confirmed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "He was killing my people. I stopped him." "How did one so small defeat one so ancient?" The Pale One tilted its massive head, studying her with an intensity that made Thessa feel like her very soul was being examined. "I did not try to be stronger," Thessa said. "I was smarter. I waited. I watched. I struck when he was vulnerable. That is how wolves hunt." The 3 Pale Ones exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then the large one spoke again. "You were the Stone of Fenrock," it said, and its eyes fixed on the pendant at Thessa's throat. "Where did you acquire this?" "It was given to me by my king. It belonged to the first king of our people, taken from one of your kind in ancient combat." "Taken," the Pale One repeated, and there might have been amusement in its voice. "Fenrock was not defeated. He chose to lose that stone, to give it to a worthy opponent. It was a test, and your ancestor passed. Do you know what it means to wear it?" "No," Thessa admitted. "I hoped you would tell me." "It means you come as one who seeks understanding, not war. It means you acknowledge our right to judge your worth." The Pale One took another step forward, lowering its massive head until it was level with Thessa's. She could feel its breath, cold as winter wind. But it also means you accept the consequences if we find you unworthy. I accept, Thessa said, though her heart hammered in her chest. Then speak, small one. Why have you come to our domain? Why risk death to talk with creatures your kind has not seen in 1,000 years? This was it. This was the moment everything hinged on. Thessa gathered her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. The shadow wolf told me you are waking because we have grown soft, she said. Because we have forgotten what it means to be a wolf. He said you despise weakness, that you are coming to remind us of the old ways. I am here to ask if there is another path. One where we learn without being destroyed. One where the first pack and the new pack can coexist. The pale ones were silent for a long moment. Then the large one made a sound that might have been a laugh. You think you can negotiate with us? You, who build walls and write laws and sit in stone halls arguing instead of hunting. You, who send warriors to fight instead of alpha challenging alpha. You, who have forgotten the taste of raw meat and the feel of a clean kill. Yes, Thessa said simply. Because I have not forgotten. I am Omega, the lowest of my kind. But I hunt. I kill. I survived. And I am here, standing before you, when every instinct screams at me to run. That is not soft. That is not weak. The pale one leaned back, and this time Thessa was certain it was amused. You are different from the others we have seen. Most would have come with warriors, with weapons drawn, ready to fight or flee. But you come with gifts. Its eyes moved to the packs Corvin and the others carried. You come ready to trade rather than to battle. I am ready to learn, Thessa corrected. If you believe we have forgotten the old ways, then teach us. Remind us. But do not destroy us for being lost when we can be guided back to the path. And why should we bother? The pale one asked. Why should we waste time teaching when we could simply eliminate the weak and let the strong rise? Because that is not the wolf way, Thessa said, and she felt Corvin tense behind her at her boldness. The pack protects its own. The strong teach the weak. You are the first pack, the oldest and strongest. If we are your descendants, your children in some distant way, then we are your responsibility. You can choose to be teachers or tyrants. But only one of those choices is worthy of the legends told about you. The pale ones exchanged glances again, that silent communication that Thessa could not interpret. Then the large one sat back on its haunches, and the posture was somehow less threatening. You speak well for one so small, it said. But words are easy. Action is truth. If you truly wish to prove your kind is not beyond saving, you must pass a test. What test? Thessa asked, though she suspected she would not like the answer. You killed more than through cunning and patience. But can you hunt with strength? Can you track with skill? Can you work as a pack, as wolves did in the ancient times? The pale one gestured with its massive head toward the valley. There is prey in these mountains that we have been hunting for sport. A great stag, clever and fast, that has evaded us for 3 nights now. If you can find it and bring it down before dawn, we will consider that your kind still has some spark of the old ways. If you fail, or if you use weapons or tricks, then you prove you have forgotten everything that matters. Thessa's mind raced. This was both better and worse than she had hoped. Better because it was a test they could potentially pass. Worse because it removed all their advantages. No weapons. No preparation time. Just a hunt in unfamiliar territory against prey that had been evading the pale ones themselves. We accept, she said before anyone could object. The pale one's eyes gleamed with what might have been approval. Then run, small ones. The night is already half gone, and the stag will not wait for you to find your courage. We will watch from the peaks. Do not disappoint us. It turned and retreated into the cave, the other two pale ones following. Within moments, they had vanished into the darkness, leaving Thessa and her companions alone in the valley. That went well, JL said weakly. They did not immediately kill us. But now we have to hunt without weapons, Bryn protested. In mountains we do not know, tracking prey we have never seen, being watched by creatures that could crush us if we fail. This is impossible. No, Corvin said firmly. This is the test. And we will pass it, or we will die trying. JL, can you pick up the stag's trail? The tracker was already moving, nose to the ground, circling the area where they stood. There are many scents here. Deer, mountain goats, smaller prey. But yes, there is one that stands out, large, male, recent. This way. They moved quickly through the valley, following JL's lead. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, but they had no choice. They were wolves, after all. They were supposed to be able to do this. Thessa found herself falling into the rhythm of the hunt, letting instinct guide her. She had done this before, countless times, tracking smaller prey through forests and fields. This was just a larger scale, higher stakes. But the principle was the same. Watch, wait, learn the prey's patterns, strike when the moment was right. They tracked the stag for hours through narrow passes and across open snowfields. Several times they lost the trail and had to backtrack. Once they startled it and heard it crash away through the brush, putting more distance between them. But each time, JL found the trail again, and they continued. As the night wore on, Thessa began to notice things about the way they moved together. Corvin naturally took the lead, making decisions quickly and trusting the others to follow. JL ranged ahead, finding the path. Amara kept track of their position, ensuring they did not get lost in the maze of mountains. And Thessa herself moved between them, coordinating, suggesting strategies, thinking 3 steps ahead. They were not just 4 wolves moving through the mountains. They were a pack, functioning as one, each member contributing their strengths. This was what the pale ones wanted to see. This was the old way. Dawn was perhaps an hour away when they finally cornered the stag in a box canyon. It was magnificent, with antlers that spread wider than a man's arms and muscles that rippled beneath its thick coat. It saw them and pawed the ground, ready to fight or flee. We cannot bring it down by force, Corvin whispered. It is too strong, too fast. We need a plan. The canyon has only one exit, Thessa observed. But the walls have ledges. If 2 of us can climb up and around, we can come at it from above while the other 2 drive it toward the wall. When it turns to face one group, the other strikes. That could work, Amara said. But who climbs? I will, Thessa said. And JL. Corvin and Amara can drive it toward the wall. They are larger, more intimidating. The stag will focus on them. They moved into position quickly. Thessa and JL climbed the canyon walls, finding handholds in the pre-dawn darkness by feel as much as sight. Below, Corvin and Amara began to advance on the stag, making themselves visible, drawing its attention. The stag lowered its head, those massive antlers pointing toward the approaching wolves. It was not afraid. It had evaded the pale ones themselves. It did not fear these smaller creatures. That arrogance would be its downfall. Thessa reached the ledge above the stag just as Corvin and Amara charged. The stag turned to face them, muscles bunching to fight or leap away. And in that moment of distraction, Thessa jumped. She landed on the stag's back, her arms wrapping around its neck. It bucked and thrashed, trying to throw her off, but JL had jumped at the same moment, grabbing its front legs. The stag went down, Corvin and Amara closing in to pin it. For a few desperate seconds, it was chaos. Hoofs flashing, antlers swinging, wolves rolling in the dirt and snow. But they held on. They worked together. And finally, Thessa found the right angle and drove her teeth into the stag's throat. It was not a clean death like she had given the shadow wolf. This was messy, primal, exhausting. But it was also pure. No weapons. No tricks. Just wolf against prey, the way it had been done since the beginning of time. When the stag finally went still, they all collapsed beside it, breathing hard, covered in blood and dirt. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the first fingers of dawn reaching across the mountains. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had completed the test. Movement on the ridge above them. The three pale ones stood there, watching, their white fur bright against the dawn sky. The large one's voice carried down to them. Well done, small ones. You have remembered something we thought was lost. You have hunted as a pack, without weapons, without comfort, driven only by necessity and will. There may be hope for your kind yet. Does this mean you will not attack our kingdom? Thessa called up, too exhausted to stand but refusing to show weakness. It means we will talk further, the pale one replied. It means you have earned the right to speak for your kind. But whether there is peace or war, that depends on what happens next. What happens next? Corvin asked. The pale one's teeth gleamed in the growing light. Next, you bring your king to meet us. Next, we see if the leader of your pack is as wise as his messenger. Next, we decide if the new pack deserves to survive. Then they were gone, vanished into the mountains as silently as they had appeared. Thessa and her companions were left alone with the dead stag and the rising sun and the knowledge that they had passed the first test. But the true challenge was only beginning. They carried the stag back to the capital themselves, refusing carts or horses. It was symbolic, Thessa knew. They had hunted it as wolves, and they would bear it home as wolves. King Hadric needed to see what they had accomplished, needed to understand that the old ways were not dead, merely sleeping. The journey took 6 days, and by the time they reached the capital gates, word of their success had somehow spread before them. People lined the streets, watching in silence as 4 wolves carried the massive stag through the city. Some cheered. Others made warding signs, afraid of what this might mean. But everyone watched. Hadric met them in the great hall, and for once, he came down from his throne to stand level with them. He circled the stag slowly, examining it, noting the wounds that showed how it had been killed, by teeth and determination, not by weapons or tricks. You spoke with them, he said. It was not a question. We did, Thessa confirmed. And we hunted for them. They have agreed to negotiate. But they want to meet you, your majesty. They want to see if our leader is worthy of leading a pack. Murmurs rippled through the assembled court. The king meeting with the pale ones? Traveling to their domain? It was unthinkable. It was dangerous. It was absolutely necessary. When? Hadric asked. At the next full moon, Corvin said. They will wait in the valley for you. But you cannot bring an army. Only a small group, as we did. They must believe you come in peace. Or they will see it as an invasion and respond accordingly, Thessa added. The king was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. I will go. But if this is a trap, if they mean to kill me and destabilize the kingdom, then I will go first, Thessa interrupted. If they mean treachery, let them practice on an Omega before risking the king. No, Hadric said firmly. You have done enough, Thessa Shadowbane. You have killed a legend, warned a kingdom, negotiated with ancient powers, and proven that strength comes in many forms. I will not hide behind you when it is my duty to face what comes next. He looked around the hall, at all the wolves who had once dismissed Thessa, who had laughed at her warnings, who had thought Omegas were weak and inconsequential. Let this be a lesson to all of us, the king continued. We have grown comfortable with our assumptions, secure in our hierarchies. We thought we knew what strength looked like, what wisdom sounded like, what courage could accomplish. We were wrong. He turned to Thessa directly. You were right when you said the old ways are not about strength alone. They are about adaptability, about using whatever advantages you have, about thinking rather than just fighting. The Pale Ones want to see if we remember this. And thanks to you, we can show them we do. Over the following weeks, preparations were made for the king's journey. But more than that, changes began to ripple through the kingdom. Pacts that had rigidly maintained their hierarchies began to question them. Omegas who had been dismissed as weak began to be seen differently. Training methods changed, incorporating cunning alongside strength, patience alongside aggression. The kingdom was learning, just as the Pale Ones had demanded. Thessa spent those weeks training with different packs, sharing what she had learned about hunting and tracking and surviving. She found herself teaching warriors who had twice her experience but had forgotten how to think beyond brute force. She found herself counseling alphas who had led for years but had never questioned their assumptions. And in the quiet moments, she found herself talking with Corvin, planning for futures both hopeful and dark. If the meeting with the Pale Ones went well, the kingdom would need to adapt even more, to integrate the old ways with the new. If it went poorly, they would need to prepare for a war they could not win. Do you think they will accept him? Corvin asked one evening as they stood on the battlements watching the sun set over the eastern mountains. The king? I do not know, Thessa admitted. He is strong, wise, and respected. But he is also a product of our modern world. He has lived in stone halls his entire life. He has never had to hunt his own food or sleep without guards. The Pale Ones may see that as weakness. Or they may see it as evolution, Corvin suggested. We adapted to a changing world. That takes its own kind of strength. Perhaps, Thessa said. I suppose we will find out soon enough. The full moon came, and with it, the journey back to the eastern mountains. King Hadric traveled with a small group. Thessa and Corvin, of course, but also 3 of his most trusted advisors, including old Garen who had once called Thessa a coward for killing the Shadow Wolf dishonorably. The old wolf had changed his tune somewhat after seeing what she had accomplished, though he still moved stiffly around her, uncomfortable with an Omega who spoke to kings as equals. They reached the valley as the moon rose, full and bright, turning the snow-covered peaks silver. The cave entrance loomed before them, and from within came that strange singing, louder now, more voices joining in the ancient chorus. Hadric stepped forward, and to his credit, he showed no fear. He had left his crown behind, worn simple traveling clothes instead of royal regalia. He understood that here, titles meant nothing. Only strength mattered. Only wisdom counted. Ancient Ones, he called into the darkness. I am Hadric, king of the lowland wolves, and I have come to speak with you. The singing stopped. Silence filled the valley, heavy and expectant. Then they came. Not 3 this time, but dozens. They emerged from the cave in a river of white fur and pale eyes, creatures so large and terrible that even Hadric took an involuntary step back. They spread out across the valley floor, surrounding the small group of lowland wolves completely. The largest pale one, the same one who had tested Thessa, stepped forward. It lowered its massive head to look Hadric in the eye. "You are the one who leads the new pack," it said in that grinding stone voice. "The one who sits in halls and writes laws and commands others to fight his battles." "I am," Hadric said steadily. "Though I am also the one who came here, knowing I might die, because my people deserve a chance at peace." "Peace," the pale one repeated, and there was something contemplative in its tone. An interesting concept. There was no peace in the old days. There was only the strong and the weak, the quick and the dead. "But you seek peace." "Why?" "Because I have seen enough death," Hadric said simply. "Because I have sent enough young wolves to die in battles that could have been avoided. Because strength without wisdom is just violence, and violence without purpose is just waste." The pale ones murmured among themselves, that strange language echoing through the valley. Then the large one spoke again. "Your messenger impressed us. She killed more than when warriors could not. She spoke truth when others might have lied to gain advantage. She hunted with her pack and succeeded where we expected failure. But you are not her. You are king. You command others to act while you remain safe. That is not the wolf way." "No," Hadric agreed, and his voice carried through the valley with surprising strength. "That is the leader's way. I do not hunt because I have others who hunt better than I could. I do not fight every battle because I have warriors trained for war. But I do stand here, before creatures that could end me with a single blow, because some things only a leader can do. That is my strength, knowing when to act and when to trust others to act for me." The pale one tilted its head, considering. "A clever answer. But cleverness is not the same as worthiness. We have slept for 1,000 years, waiting for wolves who could challenge us, who could prove they deserved to inherit the earth we once ruled. Instead, we woke to find soft creatures hiding behind walls, forgetting the hunt, forgetting the moon, forgetting everything that makes a wolf truly wolf." "Then teach us," Hadric said, and Thessa heard echoes of her own words to these creatures weeks before. "If we have forgotten, remind us. If we have grown soft, toughen us. But do not destroy us for being ignorant when we are willing to learn. And if we do teach you, if we do share the old ways, what do we receive in return?" the pale one asked. "Why should we spend time and effort on wolves who may simply forget again once we return to sleep?" Hadric was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he gestured to Thessa. "Come here, Shadowbane." Thessa stepped forward, standing beside the king, and together they faced the assembled pale ones. "This is what you receive," Hadric said. "Wolves like her. Omegas who remember how to hunt. Warriors who think as well as fight. Leaders who listen to wisdom from any source, not just the traditional ones. We cannot promise to be what you once were, the world has changed too much for that. But we can promise to carry forward what matters most. The pack. The hunt. The understanding that strength comes in many forms." The large pale one studied them both for a long moment. Then it made a sound that might have been a sigh. "The world has indeed changed," it said. "We can feel it in the air, in the earth, in the way the moon speaks to us. Perhaps it is not your failure that you have changed with it. Perhaps it is wisdom." It sat back, and the gesture seemed almost respectful. "We will make you an offer, King Hadric. We will not attack your kingdom. We will not hunt your people. But we will remain in these mountains, watching, testing, ensuring that you do not forget again. And once each generation, you will send wolves to us, young ones, strong ones, clever ones, and we will teach them the old ways. They will return to you changed, carrying knowledge that must not be lost. This will be our compact. Our peace, as you call it. And if we break this compact? Hadric asked. If we forget again? Then we will remind you, the Pale One said, and its teeth gleamed in the moonlight. Less gently than we do now. But we do not believe you will forget. Not with wolves like your messenger to remember for you. Thessa felt every eye in the valley turn to her, both lowland wolf and Pale One. The weight of expectation was crushing. But she had carried heavy things before. She had carried the Shadow Wolf's head. She had carried the truth of impending doom. She could carry this too. I will remember, she said simply. And I will teach others to remember. This I swear. The Pale One nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. The first pack and the new pack will coexist. Not as we once did, not as you do now, but as something new. Something that honors both past and future. It turned to address all the assembled Pale Ones. Let it be known that the new pack has proven themselves worthy. They have hunted without weapons. They have spoken truth without fear. They have sent their leader to face us knowing he might die. These are not soft creatures hiding behind walls. These are wolves, changed but not broken. The other Pale Ones howled, and the sound shook the very mountains. It was approval, Thessa realized. Acceptance. The deal was sealed not just by words but by the voices of the first pack singing their agreement to the moon. When the howling finally faded, the large Pale One turned back to Hadric. Go now, king of the new pack. Return to your stone halls and your written laws. But remember this night. Remember that we watch. And remember that every generation, you owe us students to teach and wolves to remind you of what matters most. We will remember, Hadric promised. On my honor as king, we will remember. The journey back to the capital took the same 6 days, but it felt different this time. They carried no trophy, bore no wounds. But they carried something more valuable, a future. A chance. A promise that their children would not have to fight a war against creatures out of legend. When they arrived, the entire city turned out to greet them. Not because they had won a battle, but because they had won something better. They had found understanding where everyone expected only violence. Hadric stood on the steps of the great hall and addressed his people, telling them of the compact, of the peace that had been won through courage and wisdom rather than strength of arms. He spoke of how the old ways and the new ways could coexist, how change was not betrayal but adaptation. And then he did something no one expected. He took the pendant from around Thessa's neck, the stone of Fenrock that had bought them entry to the Pale One's valley, and he placed it back around her neck himself. This stone was carried by the first king of our people, he said loudly enough for all to hear. It represents the connection between old ways and new, between the first pack and the new pack. And from this day forward, it will be carried not by kings or warriors, but by the one who forged this peace. Thessa Shadowbane, Omega who hunts like an alpha, wolf who speaks truth to power, you will be our reminder. You will be the one who ensures we never forget the compact we have made. The crowd erupted into cheers, though Thessa saw some faces in the crowd that were less enthusiastic. Change was never easy, and there would always be those who resisted it. But that was fine. She had faced the Shadow Wolf. She had hunted for the Pale Ones. She had helped forge peace between ancient enemies. She could handle a few stubborn wolves who did not want Omegas rising above their station. That evening, as the celebrations continued in the great hall, Thessa slipped away to the battlements. She needed air, needed space, needed to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few months, she had gone from invisible servant to Shadowbane, from Omega to King's counselor, from nothing to something. It was overwhelming. "You should be celebrating," Corvin said, appearing beside her as he so often did. "You are the hero of the hour." "I am tired," Thessa said honestly. "Tired of being watched, tired of being tested, tired of carrying weight that should be shared by many but seems to rest mostly on my shoulders." "Then share it," Corvin suggested. "Train others to think as you do. Teach young wolves to question assumptions and use their minds as well as their strength. You do not have to carry this burden alone." "Do I not?" Thessa looked at him. "The king gave me the stone of Fenrock. He made me the keeper of the compact. That is not a burden that can be easily shared." "No," Corvin agreed. "But it is also not a burden you must carry without support." He hesitated, then continued. "I have been thinking. My territory is in the east, closest to the Pale Ones. When the time comes to send students to learn the old ways, they will likely gather in my lands first. I could use someone with experience negotiating with the first pack. Someone who understands both worlds, old and new." "You are asking me to come to your territory?" Thessa asked, surprised. "I am asking you to consider it," Corvin said carefully. "Not as a servant or even as an advisor. As a partner. Someone who helps shape the future we are building." There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made Thessa's breath catch. This was not just about politics or strategy. This was about something else, something personal that had been building between them since that first moment in the council chamber when he had believed her warnings. "I will consider it," she said finally. "After I have rested. After I have had time to think about what I want my future to look like." "That is all I ask," Corvin said, and he smiled. "Take your time, Shadowbane. You have earned it." He left her alone then, and Thessa stood on the battlements looking out at the eastern mountains where the Pale Ones waited and watched. Somewhere up there, ancient wolves were settling back into their caves, satisfied that the new pack had proven itself worthy. Satisfied that the compact would be kept. She touched the stone of Fenrock at her throat, feeling its weight and history. She was Omega. She was Shadowbane. She was the bridge between old and new, between what had been and what would be. It was a heavy burden. But as she stood there in the moonlight, feeling the wind in her hair and the stone against her skin, Thessa Shadowbane realized something important. She was strong enough to carry it. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched the first pack rule 10,000 years ago, the same stars that would watch whatever came next. And beneath those eternal lights, a small Omega wolf smiled, knowing that she had changed the world not through strength or birthright, but through courage, wisdom, and a refusal to accept that some wolves were meant to be invisible. The future was uncertain. The compact with the Pale Ones was new and untested. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to change, moments when the old ways and new ways clashed rather than blended. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. There was a possibility. There was hope. And sometimes, that was enough.